Oh. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ann Knigendorf. I'm a writer and editor here at the library. And thank you all so much for coming tonight. This is a great crowd for poetry. Oh, good. Yes, clap for poetry. So before we talk about tonight's event, I'd like to mention a couple things we have coming up. Has anyone here been to a movie on our roof? Yay! Another thing to clap about. Okay, please. So that's just right out there. And if you have not been to a movie on our roof, you can on Friday. So as part of our yearly Off the Wall series, we're showing Crazy Rich Asians. So you can bring a chair and a picnic, no alcohol please, and be here by 8:45 to watch, and we will provide the popcorn. On Wednesday, next Wednesday, at the Plaza Branch is a program called The Rise of the Young Feminist Party with Young Feminist Party Deputy Executive Director Claudia Nachega. She'll discuss the state of feminism in America and in the world, and her organization's efforts to finalize the Equal Rights Amendment and advance gender equality. But tonight, this is the second in what I hope will become a regular series here at the library. A couple years ago, we did the first State of Poetry event with then Poets Laureate Huáscar Medina and Mary Frances Wagner. Tonight, we're pleased to welcome Kansas Poet Laureate Traci Brimhall and Missouri's David Harrison. And we also have the absolute best moderator for this program. How lucky are we to have Kansas City's first poet laureate, Melissa Ferrer-Civil, here as the go-between between Kansas and Missouri. In addition to being Kansas City's first poet laureate, Melissa is a performer, organizer, and educator living on unceded Kaw, Kansa, Kickapoo, and Oceti-Sakowin lands. Rooted in the practical and the possible, their spoken word poems and songs are mostly responses to the world around them and their own internal journey. Melissa is the founder of the arts and organizing event series A Nation in Exile. Melissa also earned a bachelor's in both creative writing and Italian from Florida State University. She has also earned a master's of education with a specialization in urban education from Park University and an MFA in creative writing from Randolph College. It's a lot of degrees. Welcome, Melissa. And Traci Brimhall is a professor of creative writing and narrative medicine at Kansas State University. She's the author of 4 poetry collections, and her next book, Love Prodigal, will be out in November. Her poems have appeared in publications such as The New Yorker, The Nation, The New Republic, Poetry, The New York Times Magazine, and Best American Poetry. She's received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Parks Service, and Purdue Library's special collections to study the lost poem drafts of Amelia Earhart. I didn't know she had lost poem drafts, so that sounds like a whole different program. And David Harrison describes himself as an only child who grew up with books, imagination, and a love for the outdoors. He majored in biology at Drury University and studied parasitology at Emory University. Each poet tonight has a scientific slant. You won't find that anywhere else. He has worked as a musician, pharmacologist, editorial manager, business owner, author, and poet. His poetry has inspired plays, been set to music, sandblasted into a library sidewalk, and painted on a bookmobile. He holds 2 honorary doctorates of letters and has an elementary school named for him. He has published 110 books of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. Please welcome Traci and David.
Wow. Okay, can we just do like another round of applause for those like introductions? And because we've already done introductions, but I think everyone has like a way of defining themselves in their work, I would love for you to introduce yourselves again, but what's important to you, and then also how long you've been serving your laureateship.
So I'm Traci Brimhall. I'm in my second of my 4 years as laureate. So Kansas has a 4-year laureateship. And I think I'm just finally figuring out the job. So it's good that they give me a minute. And I've been living in Kansas for 11 years. I moved 10 times before that. So it's the longest I've ever lived anywhere. including 4 years at Florida State.
Oh.
We'll talk about it. Gosh, I think actually David just recently featured me on his blog and shared some of my thoughts and feelings about poetry with some newspapers in the area, and I talked about how what made me a poet and the reason I care about poetry is it makes me feel less alone.
Wait, okay, I'm sorry. You can't say something like that and then like, how? Can we just ask like, how does it make you feel less alone?
I just remember my intro to poetry college professor reading, the first living poet that I knew existed to me on a picnic bench outside of the library at Florida State. And I could feel it was sublime. Something in the air changed. I felt changed on the inside, and I recognized somebody's interior life. And I realized there were other people who felt like me and thought like me, even though it was an experience I hadn't had yet. But I just felt deeply connected to another human being in this world in like a really beautiful, intimate way.
That's amazing. Who was the professor?
The professor, she was a temporary instructor. Her name was Ginny Grimsley. And the poet she was reading was Sharon Olds.
Oh, yes, Sharon Olds is good. All right, thank you, David.
Well, Missouri has a 2-year post, and I was appointed by the Missouri governor last year, early July, so my post will end next year at the end of June. And like Traci says, it takes a while to figure out what you're supposed to be doing and how you might go about it. So in my case, I'd like to talk about this a little bit later, but I just took it literally that my job was to see if I could reach as many people as I could in the course of 2 years around the state and speak the gospel of poetry. See if I can make more and more people aware of the fact that poetry is part of us. It's in our daily lives from the time before we're born. And so that's my various efforts in that area. I became a poet by eliminating all the other possibilities. As you heard, I was a science major, and you also heard correctly that my master's work was in parasitology, that is the study of parasites. My specialty was found in a rat, the rat tapeworm Hymenolopus diminuta. There won't be a test on this. Okay. And during that period of time, I began to write at night, late, because a Drury University College then professor told me I should be a writer. So that went on for years without much luck. Eventually changed jobs, went to Hallmark Cards. My poor wife, Sandy, where are you? Saw you come in, raise your hand. And so she went along with the change, and I wound up at Hallmark. And one of the first things that happened to me was that my new boss gave everybody in the department a copy of a book by Carl Shapiro on poetry. And I had never read a whole lot of poetry. I'd read mostly novels and short stories. So I read that book eventually and thought, I kind of identify with that. I wonder, nah. And so I went on with my writing. Eventually I published nonfiction, and eventually I published fiction. But years passed, and I finally got on the school board in Springfield, Missouri, and that was that last straw. I had no more time. My writing went downhill. And I couldn't write well, I couldn't sell anything, and I finally gave myself a lollipop. I finally decided I'm going to see if I can write a poem. So for 3 years, that's all I did was write poetry at night. Most of it just was awful, but I didn't know that. That's a saving grace that we all count on as writers, is we know how terrible we are at times. And after that, I actually found a publisher sold some poems. My first book of poetry came out in 1993, but I had been thinking about it since 1973. So you don't want to rush into these things. Well, that's probably enough for now.
Wow. Okay. Well, you touched on this a little, David, so I kind of want to go a little deeper. But what do you, since I've become poet laureate, everyone asks me, like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, that's a really good question. So what is it that y'all do? What is your unique take on this thing we call being poet laureate? What are your roles and responsibilities?
Well, some of those are like defined by the place that makes you poet laureate. So certainly for Kansas City, they're like, we need you to do X amount of events and serve in this way. So mine officially on legal paperwork came with, I must do 12 events a year, free events for the public, and I must edit Kansas Magazine's poetry. And I feel like there was like one other thing. I did have to, I was required to do the governor's inauguration, and there was like one other thing that I was like required to do. But the rest of it is sort of up to me. And so, like, I've been able to like kickstart quite a few cool, fun things. Like next year on High Plains Public Radio, we'll have a poetry program featuring poets from the 5 High Plains states for that NPR program out there. And I'm bringing poetry to the state fair, so any Kansans, if you're headed down to Hutch in early September here, you'll see 20 poems up on posters around the fair at different exhibits. And those are just sort of like bees I had in my bonnet of like cool ways I wanted to reach people with poetry. But I also realized I should just be artistic director for life because I have tons of plans and ideas, but it's only so much time and so much energy. And I do have a day job and a kid and a life and other things. So what was my focus going to be? And because both I teach at a land-grant institution and because I teach cookbooks as literature and narrative medicine and love to bake, I've focused a lot of my efforts in food and poetry around food. So last fall I did a poetry harvest where I featured Kansas poets writing poems about season and food. And I just received a grant to do a poetry cookbook. Where I'm trying to gather 20 chefs. I've got 18 from Kansas to give me recipes and poems. Poets will write responses to these recipes. The chefs have all been asked to write a recipe or offer me a recipe that they already have that uses a lot of accessible, sustainable, or shelf-stable ingredients because 10% of the cookbooks will be donated to food banks because I want the recipes to be accessible for everybody, not you've won a James Beard Award and now source your local caviar or whatever, but like accessible recipes for that all Kansans can approach in their kitchen. And then poets will write poems in response to that, and the cookbook will also have recipes for poems and prompts in the back.
Amazing.
Thanks.
That's really dope. Yeah. Were you done? It sounded like you were going to continue.
I have more. That's a good
Okay,
start,
that's a good
of
start.
some
That's a good
ideas of
start.
things that I'm into.
That's amazing.
Trying to make happen.
Yeah. And how about you, David?
Do you lease out your services? Well, Missouri doesn't have, that I'm been made aware of, that kind of agenda. It's more, I think, left up to the individual to use his or her own resources, whatever they may be. And I'm known as a children's writer. My first book was published in 1969. I'd like a little bit more respect.
You got it.
And it happened to be a story for kids. And I really liked it. I had been getting rejected for almost 10 years. And I had written all kinds of stuff. And I sold some things, but I had so much fun writing that book for kids. So I wrote another one. And, the first one sold a lot of copies, 2 million copies. And the next one got read on Captain Kangaroo, and the third one got a Christopher Award. I thought, there's just something about this kid thing. I've got to do this. So here I am all these years later, and I become the state poet laureate for Missouri, and I'm a children's writer. I'm a children's poet. I've had 20 books of poetry out or more. And I'm the first one in Missouri. I haven't found anyone anywhere else. It's possible that I'm the first children's poet in America to become honored by this position. I don't want to say that for sure, but I'd love to find others because I want to pick their brains, see what I'm supposed to be doing. But therefore, I come at it with a little different view of what I can do. And since I'm familiar with children and working with teachers and in elementary schools, I put a lot of my effort into that area with the assumption that if we're going to convert very many people to poetry, we better start before they know the difference and make them acquainted with poetry and enjoy having it read to them and reading it themselves and writing it. So probably a disproportionate amount of my efforts go that way. But being in the business as long as I have, I'm sorry. I'm happy to know a lot of poets around the country. So not long ago, last fall, I went to the editor-in-chief of the Springfield, Missouri paper. It's a Gannett paper, news leader. And I know the editor-in-chief who had for a long time. And I went to Amos and said, what would you think if I did a column, a poetry column? Would you entertain the notion? And I thought he might say no because fewer and fewer papers around the United States carry poetry anymore. Mm-hmm. At one point, many years ago, many papers did, but technology went somewhere else and interest went somewhere else and so on. So Amos said yes. So I'm blessed already. So I said, no, all I have to do is come up with a weekly poetry column. So I thought, well, I can do a certain number of them, but I need other voices. I want people from all over the country, maybe other countries, to tell us why they like poetry, what it means to them, how they came to poetry. And so I sent out letters, and pretty soon I had 60 poets from around the United States, people I know, and kind of leaned on them and said, there's no money in it, but there's a lot of glory. We've all heard that. And so that's where we started, and now every week we have the Springfield News Leader and now 4 other papers, a couple in Missouri, one in Kansas, and one in South Dakota. They carry this column. And Traci was my guest this last week, and I've already had one viewer say that your column was her favorite of all the columns.
Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you.
I don't know if I should tell you that or not. So I'm very pleased to be calling this my project. Mm-hmm. It's taking a lot of my time organizing it and so forth, and yet I feel like I'm contributing something, not just to Missouri, but to readers around the country, and so that's my main project. My first effort had been something I call the Word of the Month Poetry Challenge. I have a blog. I really wish they'd change the name of that. It's just a terrible sounding word.
Blog?
Blog. Something like a frog threw up.
Actually.
But anyway, I started this in 2009. And I post something on my blog almost every day. Some 4,000 posts now. So every month I introduce a new word because I keep telling people every word has all kinds of stories in it. Mm-hmm. No word is unimportant. And so look at a word, think about it, study it, make it tell you its stories. And little by little, you'll find at least one that inspires you to write something. If you're not a poet, write a story or start a novel. I don't care what you do with it. But look at that word and value it. So I've been doing this all these years, and I've had poets from everywhere join in, some I know, some I don't, from a good many countries now. And every month I post my word. This month it's scale, S-C-A-L-E. And then I see what happens. Well, I thought, this is what I'll do as the Missouri Poet Laureate. I'll put that out there, and Missourians everywhere will join in. Not a single soul did. Well, maybe one. Not sure. Could be from Kansas. So that one didn't go anywhere, and the column was the second one.
Okay, so that's the role of Poet Laureate. Before I ask this next question, is anyone a self-identified poet in this room? Can you raise your hand? Okay, we got some poets in the room. So I'm wondering, for the poets and the non-poets, what do y'all consider the role of poet in community, right? Because I think there's like a sentiment in the air around poetry being something that's like light and fluffy and like for people who have time. And then you have like Audre Lorde, poetry is not a luxury, it is like a necessity. But what do y'all think the role of poetry or the poet is in their communities?
I mean, for me, even without a title like laureateship, which comes with a set of responsibilities, even before then I said I was a poet for the friends, because I feel like poets are people who will tell you real things. Even today I met up with somebody for coffee before coming here, and we just like immediately were at the deepest levels of human connection, sharing the deepest, the darkest, the relatives in prison, the like whatever was happening, you know, like we were really diving into the hard pieces. And I feel like part of the reason I am still a poet is because I meet up with people all the time and we're like, what are you writing? And we keep looking at each other's stuff. And a lot of times, especially, you know, with kids and a job or and laundry to do, right, it can fall to the bottom of the to-do list. But it's my people who are like, hey, what you got, what's new? When are we having another writing night? And I think the role of the community really is to help us. I also think I'm alive inside my own life in a way that I wouldn't be if I didn't have poetry. Ooh. So that first poem that made me feel less alone woke me up. Like I was sleepwalking a little bit. I was a little bit emotionally like, meh. And then I was like, oh my gosh, what is going, like awake inside my body in a way that I didn't think I was before. And I think that's part of poetry's power. As a laureate, I feel the need to reach as many people as possible. As a human and a poet alone, without the title, I just want to save 2 or 3 other people. And not in a grandiose way, but in a let's speak deeply to each other, like through poems, like we are having sleepovers and we are talking in the dark in our sleeping bags, and let's tell each other the real stuff. And like, and I think if that's all we ever do, if all we ever reach is 2 or 3 other people whose souls we're whispering to in the dark, that's beautiful. And all we truly need is somebody to help keep us awake inside our lives, and keep our souls present, and not sleepwalking through our lives. And that's what I think the role of a poet in community is to find your 2 or 3 other people and be like, how's your soul? Is it awake? And that's the job. As a laureate, of course, I feel like I gotta get to schools and I gotta like go do these things, which are truly important. But as a poet in person, I think that is my job in my community, is to say hi to some other people's souls.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. David.
There's a guy in Springfield, a former mayor, Bob Stevens, and he's also a poet who took it upon himself not too long ago, a couple of years ago, to get up a band of local practitioners, local poets, and start getting us booked in places just for the fun of reading aloud to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I'm just a follower on this one. I have nothing whatever to do with it. Bob books us all over the place. We have given poetry readings in bars, in churches, and wherever, whoever will have us. And whoever can, among the 12 of us who can make it on that particular night, goes. And we just read. And people come and we talk about it. And that's one of the ways you can use poetry as a community activity. I think poetry has gone through an evolution. There was a time that I mentioned earlier when so many newspapers carried poetry, because it was poetry for every person. It was the kind of poetry that you can relate to. You don't have to know too much about the Greek gods or, to understand the puns and the innuendos. Somehow that went away, and about the same time, the universities began to really make some sophisticated poets. So sophisticated that most people who are not involved in that kind of studies didn't relate very well to them, and that's a double whammy pulled us away from poetry. Now, over the last several years, there's been such an effort in elementary schools to introduce kids to poetry because, one, they found that it's a great teaching tool for youngsters who are just beginning to read, trying to make those connections with sounds and words and so on. It's a great tool, it's the best one. But those kids also grow up, they get older, they carry that love of poetry with them. Pretty soon they're younger teenagers. And guess what? On a national scene, there's more poetry being read now by that age range than ever before. And hopefully that's a wave that's going to sort of reshape the map for poetry and poets as we go along. I certainly hope so.
Yeah, that also reminds me of so I grew up doing spoken word, and I think that's another way that poetry has broken away from academia in order to reach people in the streets, just the rhythm of poetry, the immediacy and urgency of it, and speaking that out makes it much more accessible. I know when I go into classrooms and stuff, the way to get a kid who starts the class, because I love asking kids who actually likes poetry, and only 2 will raise their hand, and but then we watch some spoken word poems, and they're like, I didn't know you could do that that's poetry too, So yeah, I definitely think there's something in that accessibility and that whispering intimacy too that we got to talk more after that. But we got some.
You're getting her all revved up over here.
So I'm about to ask y'all I asked you to choose 2 poems to read, but before then, I think you already touched on it a little bit, especially you with the food. What are your current obsessions? That's what are you obsessed with?
I don't even write about food. That's what. So I put this in the blog for David's blog. Was that it was the pandemic that made me become really into my cooking, because I would journal the 5 senses every night. Something I heard, smelled, tasted, felt, and saw. And so I would just keep recounting cooking because, of course, I need flavors. That's often then smells would come in, the visuals of things, the feel of things, like the papery outsides of garlic. And, so then it was just that whole, and it just started because I would journal that at night. As soon as I'd pull out a cutting board, I slipped into present tense. I was not thinking about my to-do list. I was not thinking about texting somebody back. I was not thinking about switching the laundry over. I was not thinking about my brain's a side quest to recover old memories and really think through if I said the stupid thing that I remember saying. I stopped doing all of that and just sorted the peppers by color and just luxuriated in the feel of things and just really tried to find a synonym for that pink inside the grapefruit. And I just was just deeply wherever I was, if I had a cutting board out or a knife in my hand, I was just very present. And so I don't think I write a lot of food poems, but a lot of similes that contain food started to show up. So I'm still writing about other things. Right now, the first gift my beloved ever gave me was a book of backyard astronomy called 365 Starry Nights. And because we both travel enough and life is chaotic enough, we like to travel with the book and go stargaze with each other and read about what we're supposed to be seeing in the night sky with each other. And so a lot of stargazing is happening. A lot of stuff about international moon observation night is coming up. That's a thing that I didn't know existed. So I just really love that there are all of these, that classic I'm a poet. He's a physicist. We're connected on the stars. But I just keep writing about the sky because also Kansas is a state that I love so much. But our motto is it's not that bad because people drive through us on the way to like charismatic geology and stuff. But we have the most spectacular sky. And what is so amazing about our sky is that you can't predict when you're going to get treated to something truly extraordinary. You can't plan your trip to, you can plan your trip to the Grand Canyon, you can't plan your trip to some of the most spectacular skies you're ever going to see. And so we have a rule about sky emergencies. If somebody in my family calls a sky emergency, you have to drop whatever you're doing, you have to run outside or run upstairs to those upper windows to see that sunset or that anvil cloud or whatever it is. You can call a sky emergency and everybody must run to come to the window. It's why I love driving through the state too, is you'll see some of the most spectacular things. Like the sky in Kansas, if I get treated to sunsets, and I need to watch for deer too, but I will be like hitting the roof of my car because it's so outrageously gorgeous.
Yeah.
It just makes you a little bit Looney Tunes to see that much beauty all at once. And so just the sky in general, but specifically the night sky, has just, it's classic poet stuff. But that's just been my obsession lately, is really thinking about my cloud collector handbook and my storms and my stars and all the things that Kansas is unique and special about, and how often it treats me to these sky emergencies.
Oh my gosh, sky emergency. That's a book title.
You can call a sky. Okay, I was thinking an essay, but I'll work on it. Yeah.
Also had like a recent experience when I was looking up at the moon, and I felt me and the moon had this like deep relationship.
You do.
And then I was like, oh, I'm a bit too much of a poet. Like I can't. Like so.
You're gonna like this.
And a wine.
Yeah, maybe it was a wine. Maybe it was. How about you? What are you currently obsessed with?
Well, my poetry has changed over the years as the market has. I'm a freelancer. Whatever the market requires, I try my best to still be me and write for the market. So when I began, we were still having fun. Children were having fun. This is in the days of Prelutsky and Shel Silverstein. And they taught us adults, the poets, kids, it's okay to laugh. You know, you can be silly. And so I was silly. And being a storyteller in the first place, thought I had one with me. Yeah. I told stories. I told short narratives, but did it as in poetic form. When you're writing for kids, you don't have to write free verse, but most of us stay with verse. Once in a while, we'll wander away. But anyway, kids like things that rhyme. They like the meter. They can count on it. So here's one from the very first book.
Before you read anything, could I just say I'm a little older and my hearing isn't very good. And if you speak a little slower, when you read your poetry, then it really helps me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that self-advocacy. We love it.
Monday. Overslept. Rain is pouring. Missed the bus. Dad is roaring. Late for school. Forgot my spelling. Soaking wet. Clothes are smelling. Dropped my books. Got them muddy. Flunked a test. Didn't study. Teacher says I must do better. Lost my money. Tore my sweater. Feeling dumber. Feeling glummer. Monday sure can be a bummer. That was fun. I had no motive. I had nothing I was trying to insist that it goes with the curriculum. Now, things have changed since then. Today, we're very concerned that that a minute go by that we're not teaching something to the kids. The art of teaching is being pushed aside for the science of teaching. And so most of the teachers I talk to say that we don't have time to do what we do so well because we have to do what is science and whatever. So this is what I write today because, well, that was, by the way, somebody catch my homework. I'm just terrible about marketing. Besides, this is out of print. But this one came out a couple of years ago, and it did very well. And I'll keep talking until I find the darn poem. So this is a book about dirt and the things that live beneath our feet. See, I'm teaching you now. So pay attention. So this is the last poem in the book. Sort of summarizes what I've been telling them. Beneath our feet, beneath our sight, below the roots where green grass grows, there's more to dirt than we'd suppose. In places black as night, creatures slither, wriggle, creep, nurse their babies, snuggle, sleep. There's more to dirt than we'd suppose. Quiet things in hidden holes, burrow down where secrets lie. There's more to dirt than meets the eye. From centipedes to mousy voles, they come and go without a sound, seek their safety underground. There's more to dirt than meets the eye. Creatures large and small retreat where boulders rest and tree roots drink. There's more to dirt than we might think. So many lies beneath our feet, so much to learn, so much to know. And now we've learned a lot, although there's more to dirt than we might think. Thank you very much. So this is the change in what we present to young people. They still like poetry, and they're learning, but the poets change with the times. At least this one tries to.
I'm going to let you read in a second. I just wanted to say something that is very important. I spend a lot of my time thinking about dirt. Like, I'm not even kidding. Just feeling dirt. Like, I love dirt. It's great.
I refer to it as the only dirty book I'll ever read. But I have others in mind.
Tracy.
So I thought I would read one thing that is a whisper in the dark poem, and one thing that is a poem that I've written explicitly because I am Poet Laureate, and I think I'm thinking about audience differently, and the purpose of it is different. And so the first one, speaking of like teachers trying to teach, the poem, or it needs to have the lesson plan or the thing that the state assessment's going to be on in it. I love facts. I think facts are like a foreplay of wonder, of like it gets you curious and keeps you going. And like I love questions, and I love weird facts. It's often about animals too. I'm really obsessed with weird animal facts. And so a friend of mine said she feels like she's trading in all of her secrets about her marriage just to get people to be interested in these things in history. She's like, I just really want to tell you about like the witch trial of 1162. But she'll just tell you other things so that she can secretly slip in. And I also feel like most of the time, I'll tell you whatever as long as you let me tell you about hippos. So I feel like I'm trading back and forth between those two things. So this poem contains a lot of facts, and I see it as one of my whisper in the dark poems that I wrote more for myself and my own understanding of my humanity and pleasure than, to speak publicly, I guess. It's a whisper poem. Thanatopsis. And Thanatos was the god of death. I know we're not supposed to have Greek gods anymore, so we can be more accessible. But Thanatos' death or darkness. It's hard to believe, I know, but I swear most elephants weigh less than the tongue of a blue whale. This might be easier to believe. I dream of dead lovers when my anxiety is high. Their eyelashes like parentheses. Their amputated histories thickening in me like bezoars when I lick the little black mouth of the shower drain. When I practice my new lover's death in my imagination, I judge my love's depth by how many tears arrive for grief's rehearsal. I've practiced card tricks, crossovers, quick comebacks. When Dali heard rumors that Lorca would be assassinated, he painted a piano floating out of a skeleton's teeth. Can you believe that? Can you believe a hippo can open its mouth wide enough to fit a 4-foot child inside? I keep forcing my child still against a wall, balancing a pen on top of his skull to measure if he's past the point he would fit inside a dangerous yawn. A woman tells me her husband died by suicide last year with the gun she helped him buy 15 years ago for that very purpose. A relief, I think, to not imagine every death, but wait for the one you know is coming. She has a new hip, she says, an acheless steel joint. Maybe she'll even dance again, her hair red as desert light and survival. It's also hard to believe, but right now, vibrating honeybees are cooking a wasp with the heat of their own bodies. I've imagined my son dead, imagined his loss in summer cars, in sleep, from an unholstered hero on a playground. Already he tells me he will love me even when I'm dead. You think I should only believe what I see, but I test my hand in the cardinal's nest and hear its wingless heat. I see the skull's smile toward music, resting unplayed above it. Can you see it? My son's ribs, a white hive, a prolific darkness. My love can't save him, and that is unbelievable. My body is an instrument, my goodnight a warning. His mouth falls open so large in sleep, I can see the future swarming. I tend to write less dark stuff when I know I'm reaching a larger, more public audience, but I still need to tell my secrets to myself and to the 2 or 3 other voices that listen, because I don't think, I've learned I'm not unique in that parental empathy blowing you open after having a child and feeling like everything in the world is happening to you kind of thing. I feel like it makes you feel less nuts in your own mind to know that you're not alone in some of those anxieties.
Yeah.
The next poem was written, just a shout out to Kansas Humanities, who funds creating these chapbooks every year with Kansas poets writing on different themes. We've done birds and wildflowers, and the next one is gonna be the night sky. I do wanna say also, in terms of like teaching poetry, one of the things that I find so hard is that I want to share it with people, but so often they want to turn Robert Frost's Two Roads Diverged into a 5-paragraph essay and a correct answer about turning left in the woods. And I think they forget that it should be about mystery, fundamentally about not knowing. All art should kind of be that. And there's a term in astronomy called averted vision. If you try and like pin those stars down through the telescope lens, it's gonna fuzz out on you. And you have to kind of approach it to the side, just like look a little bit to the right or left of it, and then let your vision kind of float in. And that's when you start to see it. And I think if you try and pin art down and like, I'm gonna get an answer out of you, the moth means desire, turn left in the woods, like then it's just not, it's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so as we share poems or teach poems, to think about how we bring that averted vision into our teaching, into letting meaning and truth kind of float in from the left, rather than turn left and pin the star down. The title does also come from another astronomy term, which is stellar parallax, which is how close something appears is about where you're standing to view it. It has a bigger definition, but thinking about how close something appears all has to do with your perspective, right? Stellar parallax. Even miles apart, we want to be close, so we step out onto cold concrete and call out constellations like vows. If not holding each other, sharing the sky, the wind tugging at both of our shirts. If not marriage, it's commitment to gravity, the difference between good enough and worth forgiving. Stars taught others myth and science and how to cross the sea, but we recite galaxies like a catechism on love at a distance. You call the quick flare a falling star, even though we both know it's a meteorite. If not forever, the small lies that fill the silence with promises. My heart hangs upside down in my chest as you describe the telescope you've built, the way you want to help me see the night more clearly. But I've always seen the calculated beauty of orbits, each celestial body separate from one another, perfected by tension. If not bright as choir robes like Sirius, then Betelgeuse, red as fire's autobiography. I clutch the dark heat to my chest, marry the memory to bone. If not feather or wing, a bridge of lights to carry me to you. If not now, someday. I disciple myself to the patient distances between the stars, taste the enduring elegies, and yes, keep burning no matter how far.
Okay, so we're about to turn it to audience questions. I just have one more question before that, and it's a simple one. If you had any advice to give, do you have any advice to give to me as Kansas City Poet Laureate, or any poet in this room, or anyone who's wanting to get into poetry, like any advice, period?
I so often just retweet the advice. Is that dead naming Twitter? I don't know. I re-support, I resubscribe. I don't know. I keep sharing the advice from this book that I loved. I discovered the novelist John Irving in high school, and every day the person in front of me would just keep sharing with me what had happened in the book the night before. And there's this passage that says, you must get obsessed and stay obsessed and keep passing the open windows. And I think falling in love with something, not a person necessarily, but like a thing that you can devote yourself to without worry about how good you are at it, or whether or not you're going to get into that magazine, but just to be devoted to something, to love it, to want to serve it, to be a part of something, really changed me on a fundamental level. And so hopefully it's poetry, go poets, but to fall in love deeply with something, get yourself the Merlin app, check out those birds. Like, to fall in love deeply with the world, I think changes the way you relate to it, the way you think about yourself. And so I strongly encourage falling in love with the world. And maybe it can be poetry and language, but falling deeply in love and obsession with something, I think can really reorient your whole heart.
Come on.
I tell people, get a pencil and make marks on a piece of paper, because the mind can't improve on nothing. A friend of mine, an editor, told me this about journals one time. We were talking about journals. She said, when you get a new journal, take a pen and just mark all over that first page and rip it out and roll it up and throw it away. Now it's like the first dent on a new car. It's yours, you own it, and you can do whatever you want to with it. So those two things together, for me, make the difference between a writer and somebody who's going to spend his whole life talking about becoming a writer. So many people say, I've got all these stories I need to tell. I'm going to tell one of these days. No, you're not. You'd be doing it if you were. Now, writing's about writing. So pick up a pen and do something. And it may amaze you at how terrible it is at first, because it's a new tool. If you're a new writer, you're using something that you haven't used before. And the only way you're going to get better at it is to keep playing with it. Make mistakes, don't worry about it. My wife bless her heart, had to read my stuff for years. And I kept trying to convince her that it was better than she thought it was. It's a wonder she didn't divorce me for cruelty of some kind. But anyway, stay with it. Have fun. Writing, above all, should be fun. If it isn't fun, then choose another subject and write about that.
All right, well, let's give a round of applause. And now is the time for audience questions, instructions.
Instructions. I don't know if they're instructions, but if you have a question, please come up to one of the microphones so our friends watching at home can hear you. And if anyone wants to ask a question who's watching on YouTube right now, go ahead and type it into the chat and I will ask it for you.
Yeah.
Type it into what?
The chat.
So if you want to ask,
Sir, if you have a question, come on up to one of the microphones, please.
I have a question and a suggestion. Briefly, talk about how you become a poet laureate. I mean, clearly it's not just a contest you enter. And the suggestion is you might, I appreciate dirt, you might try treating first year algebra with a poem too. That would be great. I'm just kind of curious as to the process. So, thank you.
Yeah, I think every state or city or the national one is a pretty, the Library of Congress appoints. And I think we had different processes, but you can fill in what your process was like. But it is a democratic process a bit for Kansas. There's an open call for submissions. People submit their statement of purpose, letters of support, especially if there's videos of you reading somewhere, you add those links, but you talk about what your projects would be, those sorts of things in your statement. Then they select, I thought it was 3-bit, they said it was 4 finalists. And then those 4 finalists give presentations to a panel of people who represent booksellers, librarians, arts council members. So it's a panel of 10 or 12 people was put together to hear our talks on poetry, because the goal isn't somebody who has the fanciest resume. The goal is who can get in front of an audience and talk to people about poetry, not just talk to other poets about poetry, but who might have a good project idea, who gives a good talk, who I think it's a combination of factors, but I've never been in the backside of that room, but that's what I thought they were looking for, because they do not let past poet laureates be involved in the decision making for the new poet laureate, because again, it's not about poets speaking to other poets, it's about poets speaking to librarians, booksellers, community members, those sorts of folks. So that's how the process worked in Kansas. Large pool of applications. They whittled it down to 4 finalists. We gave sample talks, and then they called me to let me know I was chosen. And it is through it used to be through Humanities Kansas. Now it's through Kansas Arts Commission. So different organizations might hold the umbrella of the title and the role depending on the state or city that is creating that position in their community or state.
And in Missouri, people can self-nominate or be nominated. And they're usually 50 to 100 around the state, I think. And then those are read and winnowed down to a working number. The committee that makes the selection to go to the governor is comprised of previous, former state poet laureates of Missouri. And then those final 3 go to the governor's office and he chooses or she chooses the final one.
We've got a question from the back of the room here from Patricia Cleary Miller. So, go ahead, Patricia.
This is more of a remark and a thank you. So many people have tried to define art. Art is a way of seeing the world in a new way, or art is about truth. I love what you said, that art should be about not knowing.
Thank you.
So I have a question. You talk about a sky emergency.
Mm-hmm.
There is a political emergency in this country right now, where language is being brutalized and the nature of truth is not apparent anymore. How do you use your positions as poet laureates of 2 states to address that political emergency?
While I was not explicitly told I can't, so I also have to, we were talking about social media earlier, and there are things that I can do as a person that I can't do with my title. So I can advocate as a person or as a poet about certain things on my page, but I can't use my state title to speak about certain things or address certain things. However, and this is true as like a professor at a university, I'm not allowed to say, as professor, you should vote for this person or this is the deal. I'm not allowed to do that. But as a person, I can advocate for whatever I want and speak to whatever I want. So I do always try and I have to maintain that distinction because also I feel I must be a steward for the title because we have had the poet laureateship removed from Kansas. Kansas didn't have one for a while. It was dissolved by a past governor. And I don't want to do something that ruins something that I think does a lot of social and emotional good for people because of a stance I want to take as a private individual politically. That being said, one of the other reasons I chose food as one of my focuses is because I've thought a lot about food insecurity and done a lot with food insecurity, and I wanted to do some other forms of social good with the laureateship, which is why I've had talks that were also food fundraisers where we gathered resources to donate to food banks, which is why my cookbook plan is going to donate copies of the cookbook and proceeds to food banks around the state, and still trying to address social issues within the state with the title that I feel that still falls under the umbrella of the title that I only get to borrow for a few years. So that's sort of my guiding thing is as an individual, I speak in a different way than I do when I have a different hat on, and I try and respect that the hat is mine to borrow and still advance a lot of good within my state, but also try and carefully negotiate what it means to borrow that hat and make sure it gets passed down to somebody else when I'm done and not dissolved. So.
Good answer. In my case, I mentioned this blog that I do daily, and it has a lot of readers, and from time to time, a reader will respond in some way that can be problematic in that it's controversial and it's for whatever reason. And I send them a note and say, I'm sorry, this isn't the platform. This is a safe haven. This is the place where we just keep it light, we keep it fun. Not light, it can be serious, but we don't go there because there are plenty of other opportunities. So I'm sort of at that stage where I don't really want to go public with any of that. As you say, Traci, and private talks, private language, that's another matter. But in public life, I try not to.
Can I answer this question too? Okay. So I come at it from a very different perspective. When I first found out that I was appointed to the laureateship, there's poet Amiri Baraka, who I love. He's a very incendiary poet, right? Like very fiery poet. And Amiri did a reading at the Dodge Poetry Festival in New Jersey. He was the poet laureate of New Jersey. And it was so incendiary that they asked him to step down from his laureateship. And he was like, never that. And then, so like you talked about, they dissolved the laureateship for a while. And one of the things that I deeply believe as a poet, especially as a Black poet, is while art is beautiful because it can come from so many perspectives, it lives in mystery, all of these things. Art is also so useful because we are not, I don't think it's often talked about how much of our perspective is actually shaped by art, right? It may be the unknown, it may be mysterious, but then you still have TV, you still have journalism, you still have media, songs, all of these things like that are shaping our perspectives. And so art is a tool for creating culture, right? And for opening doors for perspectives and understandings and for people to come on a common ground. And I think if you're unafraid to, or if you are afraid to tell the truth in that way, like to say, and once again, the truth isn't this like supremacist thing that's like, my truth is the only truth and like there is no other truth, but it's like, this is the thing I see and I trust in my perspective, and so I'm offering it to the table. What do you see? Because you probably see something that I don't see, but if we can't talk, then we're never gonna get this thing right. So like for me, as Poet Laureate, like I do this thing, A Nation in Exile, which is a series of events that brings artists together with organizations, social justice organizations, community building organizations, in order to talk about very specific issues, right? Like currently we have like an exhibit up about incarceration and like looking at the carceral system and ways we can be incarcerated in our minds and in our, and just like all of these different things. And we're partnering with Decarcerate KC on that, along with Mad P talking about a man on death row who was wrongfully convicted, all of these things. So I think like for me, in this position and what I hope for Kansas City, because like when I'm not gonna take too much time, but when I submitted my application, I submitted a poem that was about how development and gentrification disappears Black bodies in Kansas City. So like I didn't want them to think that they were gonna get a poet that wasn't gonna say what she saw, right? So when they chose me, I was like, okay, we're in this then. So for me, it's like I can't, like if the this is very opposite from what you just said, but I'm gonna say.
It's okay, say it.
Like if the institution crumbles, if the institution of Poet Laureate, if the chair of Poet Laureate crumbles because I told the truth, then there is something wrong with it in the first place, right? It's just and like, thank you. But like, and I do want to name again, like this truth is just like being honest, right? If I can't be honest, then I don't want to do it, right? And I just think that we need more people being honest with one another in love and like in the spirit of togetherness and like truly wanting to figure this like political emergency out. And political, also one more thing, and then I really will stop. I'm sorry, you asked the question, I was like, all right. But like political is not just like what we see on TV, right? Like Gil Scott-Heron says, like the revolution will not be televised, because this is political right here, right? Like you showing up to hear people tell their stories, to hear people share their perspective, you deciding to have an open heart or an open mind and listening and being like, I never thought of it like that before. That's political, right? Because now your perspective is changed and you go off into this world and be a slightly changed person, you know? So, and I think poetry is inherently political for that fact, so, yeah.
It's a mundane question after that speech. As a teacher of poetry, as a model of poetry, when you get that final copy that you're ready to put to type, how much did language conventions of syntax, grammar, spelling, punctuation affect the thing you produced or the thing you taught about?
W.B. Yeats said that towards the end of his writing life that he never revised anymore except towards a more passionate syntax. And I actually love playing with sentences. I love playing with words. I think I think that those are the line and color as though we were painters. Those are the ways in which we are making. So of course I think it always matters, even the decision not to follow conventional syntax or grammar or punctuation, that's also a choice. So I think those are always the tools available to us, whether we employ them or not, or how colorful we get, or how simple we get. I think those are always the tools we are using, and so those are the tools. So I think I absolutely always consider all of it, but I might decide like, I don't want to use, or like I love using verbs as nouns, or like using the wrong parts of speech, or I'm totally playing with it on purpose. But again, I think even to say no to a spelling or grammatical convention is a choice. But those I feel are my tools, and I like playing with my tools. Making stuff is the fun part. I don't feel like publishing is the fun part. Making is the fun part. So I like really playing in my sandbox and trying out the different scoopers that I have.
May I add to that too? Thank you. Because of the brevity of the lines in most poems, even the location of the words is important. And we have to use punctuation sometimes just for the sake of making our language, our message clear with so few words. Sometimes it's by eliminating the punctuation. Sometimes it's by adding it where you would normally wouldn't. But as you say, it's the tools of the game, and you use them to form your poem. And it's a problem with sometimes proofreaders of poetry will want to put it back the way it should be, and that of course can destroy a poem. So,
We have time for this one last question. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mark. I just want to throw out my observation of poetry. When I first came to it, I thought, wait a minute, you could throw a bunch of words together that don't make a sentence, and but then in studying painting, I came to realize that, hey, this can really help me. And what I found is that poetry throws you back into an objective point of view, and I really find that it makes you brings you back to a position where you see that anything is possible. And I think that's what it opens up for me, as compared to any other writing. And I just wondered what you think about my observation. Thanks.
Do you want to kick off first on this one?
I agree with you. The poetry is the most personal form of writing. It's the most from my heart to your heart way of communicating. In a novel, you have other characters standing in for other people, other thoughts maybe, but the poem, an honest poem, is just, I'm talking to you, you're listening, you're talking back to me in your head. So for me, poetry is important because it keeps us talking, it keeps us thinking. You know what I'm thinking, you can tell Melissa what you're thinking. It's just the way we feel as human beings.
I think, too, I heard poetry compared to sculpture rather than painting, because you have to walk all the way around it to see it. And I was like, I kind of like that you can't take it in with your eyes, you've got to walk around it. And I liked that idea of you got to go see the backside of the poem. That just tickled me, I thought it was funny. And so I like that, and I like that to find out, the writer's often trying to figure out what they're thinking. So Robert Frost said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. I think I'm often trying to figure out what it is that I want to say, and that's my first revision question too. I call the first draft the zero draft, and I'm just trying to find out if there's if it came in the ER and there's a pulse to work with. Do I even have a workable draft? And then I, triage the different steps of trying to let it come out and be what, after this mess that I delivered to myself, if it can actually be something and say something. But I think to go back to I think it is a lot about trying to figure out what we're trying to say, of trying to be mysterious. I try not to have a conclusion because I'm just also not a Twitter person. I don't have 120 characters about absolutely my final thoughts on anything. I struggle with hope, even though I need it very badly. And I think it's something I'm always trying to find in what I'm writing is a reason for tomorrow. I know in a lot of environmental writing too, there's been a cry for please stop being so angry and so defeatist because we can't fix with anger. We need hope for tomorrow and hope for what the planet can look like and hope for what we can do, and that hope is the thing that helps us make change. I like to think that joy also helps us make change. So I think when I'm writing, I want to find out what I even mean. I don't want to come to a final conclusion. I want to know my next question because it is my next guide. And I need some form of hope or joy to be my little lantern in the dark to make me go into tomorrow, to make me go into the next poem, because there's a million reasons to be angry and a million reasons to doubt, and very few things make me want to be excited for tomorrow, and poems help me do that.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight.